May 8, 1945, 14:37 hours, Northwest Germany, British sector. The air smelled of diesel and wet wool. 32 women stood in a ragged line outside a canvas-topped lorry, their backs to the soldiers who had just unloaded them. No one had told them to face the wall. They simply did. It was what you did when the war was over and you had lost. The ground beneath their boots was gravel mixed with spring mud. Behind them, boots shifted. A voice said something in English, low, unhurried. Then another, softer. Canadian. One of the women began to cry. Not from fear. From disbelief. They had braced for shouting. The first word they heard was please. The knock came at 6:15. Oberhelferin Anneliese Braun woke to it in a requisitioned farmhouse near Osnabrück, where she and a dozen other Nachrichtenhelferin, signal auxiliaries, had been billeted since the retreat from the Rhine. The war had ended 3 hours earlier. She knew this because the radios had gone silent, and silence in her line of work meant either victory or collapse. She pulled on her tunic, still damp from the night before, and opened the door. A British lieutenant stood there, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 privates. He did not raise his voice. He said, "You are coming with us. Bring what you can carry." She asked where. He said, "To safety." She did not believe him. But she packed her rucksack anyway, a photograph, a comb, a tin of biscuits she had saved for 2 weeks. Downstairs, the others were already gathered. No one spoke. Outside, the lorries waited, their engines ticking in the cold. The women climbed in. The canvas overhead flapped in the wind. Anneliese sat near the back and watched the farmhouse disappear behind a curtain of trees. She thought, this is how it ends. Not with fire. With a lorry and a clipboard. She did not know where she was going. None of them did. They had heard stories, whispers in the signals room, letters from the east that arrived torn and redacted. Soviet camps where women were worked until their hands bled. French camps where rations were a sliver of bread and a cup of water. American camps where the guards looked through you as if you were already dead. They had been told many times that surrender was the same as execution, only slower. The lorry stopped twice. Once to refuel. Once because a tree had fallen across the road. Each time the women remained silent. At the second stop, one of the privates, a boy really no older than 19, offered them water from a canteen. No one took it. He set it down on the tailgate and walked away. After he was gone, the oldest among them, a widow named Kathy, picked it up and drank. Then she passed it to the others. They drank in turns, wordlessly, as if committing a minor crime. They were Helferinnen, helpers. Not soldiers, though they had worn uniforms and sworn oaths. They had staffed radio rooms, decoded transmissions, relayed orders from command posts dug into hillsides and cellars. Some had volunteered in 1942, when the posters still promised adventure and the newsreels still showed victory parades. Others had been conscripted in 1944, when the Reich began pulling women from offices and schools to replace the men who had not come home. Anneliese had joined because her brother had been killed at Stalingrad, and her mother had told her, through tears, that someone had to finish what he started. She believed this for 2 years. Then the radios went silent. Kathy had joined because her husband had been an officer, and after he died in Normandy, the Reich had offered her a pension or a posting. She chose the posting. She had 3 children to feed. By the end, she was routing casualty reports and trying not to read the names. Now they were prisoners. Technically. The British had not used that word. They had said displaced persons, and temporary custody, and repatriation processing. But the women knew what they were. They had seen the others. The Waffen-SS men marched past at gunpoint, the Volkssturm boys with their hands on their heads, the officers stripped of their insignia and loaded into caged trucks. The war had a hierarchy of guilt, and they did not know where they stood in it. The camp appeared just before dusk. It was not a camp in the sense they had imagined. No barbed wire. No watchtowers. Just a cluster of Nissen huts arranged in neat rows on a hillside, surrounded by a low wooden fence that looked more like a suggestion than a barrier. A sign at the gate read Number 4 Displaced Persons Processing Center, British Army, Northwest Europe Command. The lorries pulled through and stopped in front of the largest hut. The women were told to disembark. They stood in the gravel yard, still facing away from the soldiers, as if the posture had become instinct. Behind them, footsteps. A voice, Scottish maybe, said, "Right then. Inside. We've got tea on." The word hung in the air like a mistranslation. One of the soldiers, a sergeant with a red cross on his sleeve, stepped around to face them. He did not smile, but his face was not unkind. "You'll be processed tomorrow," he said in halting German. "Tonight you eat." You rest. No one is going to hurt you. Annalise heard Kathy's breath catch. Beside her, a young woman named Ilsa, barely 20, a typist from Hamburg, began to cry. Not loudly. Just a soft, broken sound as if something inside her had finally cracked. If this moment already changed how you see the war, subscribe, the next will surprise you even more. Inside, the hut smelled of coal smoke and boiled potatoes. There were tables, long rough-hewn things, and benches, and at the far end, a field kitchen where two men in aprons were ladling soup into tin bowls. The women stood in the doorway, uncertain. A Canadian corporal, tall, with a voice like gravel smoothed by water, gestured toward the tables. Sit, he said. It's not much, but it's hot. They sat, slowly, as if testing the solidity of the benches. The soup arrived, thick with barley and carrots, more substantial than anything they had eaten in weeks. Bread followed. Real bread, not the sawdust loaves they had been issued in the final months. And then, impossibly, tea. Strong, bitter, sweet with condensed milk. Annalise held the cup in both hands and felt the heat seep into her palms. She thought, this is a trick. It has to be. But the tea was real. The bread was real. The soldier who refilled her cup did so without speaking, without looking her in the eye, as if he understood that eye contact, right now, would be unbearable. Across the table, Kathy ate slowly, methodically, her face unreadable. Ilsa ate nothing. She just stared at the bowl in front of her and cried, silently, until one of the other women, a radio operator named Greta, put a hand on her shoulder and said, "It's all right. We're still here." Later they were shown to a smaller hut, sleeping quarters. There were cots, thin but clean, and blankets, wool and heavy. A stove burned in the corner. The Canadian corporal lingered in the doorway. "Latrines outside," he said. "Hot water in the morning. If you need anything, knock." Then he paused. "You're safe here," he said. "I know you don't believe that yet. But you are." He left. The women stood in the dim light, looking at the cots, the blankets, the stove. Annalise sat down first. The cot creaked beneath her weight. She lay back and stared at the ceiling where the tin roof sloped into shadow. She thought, I am alive. I am fed. I am warm. The thoughts felt foreign, like lines from someone else's script. "I expected chains," she wrote later in a letter she never sent. "I found a blanket." The system behind this decency was not sentiment. It was policy, pragmatic, calculated, rooted in a principle that had been hammered out in War Office memos and Red Cross conferences years before the first shot was fired. Prisoners are soldiers, not slaves. 6 words. They appeared in a directive issued in September 1939, signed by a civil servant whose name no one remembers. Those 6 words shaped every camp, every meal, every regulation that followed. They were not acts of mercy. They were acts of civilization under pressure. The logic was triad-shaped. Security. Treat prisoners well and they do not riot, do not sabotage, do not require force to contain. Diplomacy. Your prisoners are their prisoners and the enemy is watching. Reciprocity is survival. Morality. Because if you win by becoming them, you have not won. This was not idealism. This was restraint dressed as strategy. And it worked. By 1945, Britain held over 400,000 German POWs. The camps were orderly. The escapes were rare. The mortality rate was lower than in many civilian hospitals. It was not perfect, but it was not brutal. And in a war where brutality had become the norm, that distinction mattered. The first full day began with roll call. Not the shouting rifle but kind. Just names read from a list, checked against faces, recorded in a ledger. Then breakfast, porridge, toast, margarine, tea. The women ate in silence, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did not. After breakfast, they were taken to a processing tent. One by one, they sat across from a British intelligence officer, a captain with round spectacles and a fountain pen, who asked questions in careful, textbook German. Name, rank, unit, duties, political affiliations. He did not accuse. He did not interrogate. He just wrote, slowly filling out forms in triplicate. When Annalise's turn came, he asked if she had been a party member. She said yes. He wrote it down. He asked if she had been coerced. She hesitated. He looked up. "It's all right," he said. "I'm not here to judge. I'm here to process." She told him. Yes, she had joined the party in 1940 because her school had required it. No, she had not believed in it, but she had not resisted it either. She had been 19. She had been scared. He wrote it all down. Then he stamped her form and handed her a slip of paper. "You'll remain here for 2 weeks," he said. Then we'll arrange repatriation or transfer, depending on circumstances. In the meantime you work. Light duties. Kitchen, laundry, maintenance. Understood. She understood. What surprised her was the word, work. Not labor. Not punishment. Just work. The days found a rhythm. Mornings, roll call, breakfast, chores. Afternoons, mending, cooking, cleaning the huts. Evenings, tea, sometimes a film projected on a canvas screen in the mess hall. American westerns, British comedies, propaganda reels from before the war, now stripped of their urgency and shown as curiosities. The women were not forced to watch. Most did anyway. It was better than silence. Annalise was assigned to the kitchen. She peeled potatoes beside a British private named Thompson, who spoke no German and communicated entirely through gestures and the occasional shared cigarette. He was 23. He had been at Arnhem. He did not talk about it. She did not ask. Kathy worked in the laundry, washing sheets and uniforms in great steel tubs heated by coal fires. The work was hard, but she preferred it. It gave her something to do with her hands. One afternoon, a Canadian sergeant brought in a bundle of shirts and paused when he saw her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. He left the shirts and walked away. The next day he brought her a bar of chocolate. She ate half and saved the rest for Ilse. Ilse did not work. She sat in the sleeping hut, staring at the wall, speaking to no one. Greta tried to draw her out, brought her tea, sat with her, told her stories about Berlin before the war. Ilse listened but did not respond. At night she cried. Quietly. The others pretended not to hear. The photograph. Annalise was slicing carrots when Thompson pulled a photograph from his pocket and set it on the counter between them. She glanced down. A woman, maybe 30, holding a baby. Thompson pointed at the woman, then at himself. "Wife," he said. He pointed at the baby. "Daughter." Annalise nodded. She reached into her tunic pocket and pulled out her own photograph. Her brother, in uniform, unsmiling. She pointed at him. "Brother," she said. Then she made a gesture, hand flat, sweeping downward. "Gone." Thompson looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he nodded. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "He showed me his daughter," Annalise wrote later. "I showed him my ghost. We understood each other." One evening someone began to sing. It was Greta sitting on her cot, her voice low and tentative. A folk song, something about a river and a willow tree. The kind of song you sing to children. The others listened. Then one by one they joined in. Not loudly. Just enough to fill the hut with sound that was not crying or silence. Outside, the Canadian corporal paused. He stood in the doorway listening. When the song ended, he knocked lightly on the frame. The women looked up. He said in broken German, "That was nice. My mother used to sing that." Then he left. The next night they sang again. Kathy was hanging sheets on the line when the Canadian sergeant approached. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. Finally he said, "I wanted to say..." He stopped. Started again. "My brother was at Dieppe. He didn't come back." Kathy looked at him. She did not know what to say. She settled for, "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Yeah. Me too." He walked away. But the next day he brought her another bar of chocolate. If you're seeing this war in a new light, subscribe. The next scene will challenge you even more. The shift was gradual. Not a single moment, but an accumulation. The women had been told for years that the enemy was monstrous, that the British were cruel, the Americans indifferent, the Canadians savage. They had been told that surrender meant death or worse. But the enemy did not act like monsters. They acted like men who were tired and decent and trying to go home. The propaganda cracked. Not all at once, but slowly like ice in spring. Annalise began to notice the small things. The way the guards said please and thank you, the way they knocked before entering, the way they left cigarettes on the table instead of demanding gratitude. The way they treated the women not as criminals, but as human beings who had simply been on the wrong side. One afternoon, she asked Thompson why. Why the decency? Why the tea, the chocolate, the photographs? He shrugged. "Orders," he said. Then after a pause, "And because it's the right thing." She thought about that for a long time. The right thing. As if it were simple. As if the war had not spent 6 years proving that nothing was simple. But maybe it was. Maybe the right thing was just this. A blanket, a meal, a word spoken softly. Maybe that was all civilization ever was. Small decencies repeated until they became structure. Christmas came. Or rather, the idea of Christmas. It was July, but someone decided the camp needed a celebration. A chaplain arrived, a kind-faced man with a northern accent, and held a service in the mess hall. The women were invited. Most attended. Not because they were believers but because it was something to do. Something that felt, for an hour, like normalcy. Afterward there was food. Real food. Roast chicken, potatoes, tinned peas, and a cake, small, lopsided, baked by one of the cooks. The chaplain said grace. The women bowed their heads. Annalise did not pray. But she closed her eyes and thought, I am here. I am fed. I'm not alone. After the meal, the chaplain approached her. How are you managing? He asked. She thought about lying. Instead she said, I don't know. He nodded. That's all right. You don't have to know yet. Repatriation began in August. The women were called in groups, given train tickets and sent back to Germany, or what was left of it. Annalise was in the second group. She packed her rucksack, the photograph, the comb, and a letter from Thompson's wife, who had written to thank her for peeling potatoes with her husband. She did not understand the letter, it was in English, but she kept it anyway. The train left at dawn. Kathy sat beside her. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. The landscape outside the window was ruins, shattered cities, burned fields, roads choked with refugees. Annalise thought, this is what we fought for. This is what we lost. When they reached the border, the British guards disembarked. Canadian replacements took their place. One of them, a young man with red hair, looked at the women and said, Welcome home. Annalise did not correct him. Germany was not home anymore. She did not know what was. But some stayed. By 1947, over 25,000 German POWs, men and women, remained in Britain not as prisoners but as laborers, as settlers, as people who had nowhere else to go. Some married. Some rebuilt. Some simply stayed because the country that had captured them had treated them better than the country that had conscripted them. Kathy stayed. She found work in a laundry in Yorkshire, married a widower with 2 children, and lived there until she died in 1983. She never spoke about the war. But she kept the chocolate wrapper from the Canadian sergeant in a drawer, folded neatly as if it were a document of proof. Ilse returned to Hamburg. She worked in a factory, never married, and died in 1962. Greta said years later that Ilse never stopped crying. Not outwardly. But inside where it mattered. Annalise went back to Osnabrück, found her mother alive, and became a schoolteacher. She taught English. She never told her students about the camp or Thompson or the photograph. But every Christmas she baked a lopsided cake and thought about a chaplain who had said, You don't have to know yet. The war had taught them fear. The camps taught them something else. Not forgiveness, that was too large a word, too neat. But restraint. Decency. The understanding that civilization was not a flag or a creed, but a series of small acts, repeated daily even when no one was watching. If this story reminded you that history is written in gestures as much as battles, subscribe. You'll find more truths here than in any textbook. Annalise kept Thompson's photograph until she died. On the back, in faint pencil, she had written, He showed me his daughter. I showed him my ghost. We understood each other. It was found by her niece in 2003, tucked inside a hymnal. The niece did not know what it meant. But she kept it anyway. Because some things do not need explaining. Some things just need to be remembered. The knock came at 6:15. The war ended at 23:01 the night before. 32 women stood in the gravel and waited for the worst. What they got was tea. And blankets. And a Canadian corporal who said in broken German, You're safe here. They did not believe him at first. But by the time they left, weeks, months, years later, they understood. The war had taught them fear. The peace taught them mercy. And mercy, they learned, was not the absence of punishment. It was the presence of restraint. A cup of tea. A photograph. A word spoken softly in a language you barely understood. That was civilization. Not the treaty. Not the victory. Just this. The decision made every morning to treat the enemy like a person who might someday be a neighbor. The war had taught them fear. The peace taught them mercy.